Hello and welcome to today's episode of Flight of Freedom. I'm so pleased to be joined today by Harriet Frew, also known as the eating disorder therapist. Harriet is an experienced BACP accredited counsellor who specialises in supporting people with eating disorders and body image issues. She's worked in an adult eating disorder NHS service and privately since 2003. She's host of the eating disorder podcast, The Eating Disorder Therapist, and trainer in eating disorders and body image. She offers individual therapy, online courses, and breakthrough days, and a psychological approach to helping someone understand their eating disorder as a coping strategy, and then empowering them with skills and tools for change. She is passionate about the therapy relationship and instilling hope that recovery is possible. She is also an expert through her own experience, having made a full recovery from bulimia nervosa. Hi, Harriet. So lovely to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, Julia. Great to be here.
Excellent. So I've got a few icebreaker questions for you, first of all. Do you have a party trick, or would you like to?
A party trick? No. I would like to, though. I would like to say, yeah, this is my party trick and this is what I do, but sadly not.
Do you have anything particular that you'd like to be able to do as a party trick?
Well, I'll tell you what I can do, which is not exactly a party trick, but it's something that could be a party trick. I'm very good at jumping onto things, like doing kind of box jumps. I really like I can jump quite high. So that's my party trick.
Awesome. My eldest son can actually jump really, really high. He's got really big calves, and I think that's why, because he's really springy.
Right, no, sure. Yeah, no, I don't know what it is with me, because I feel a bit like a one-trick pony. I don't feel I've got lots of good mobility, but for some reason I like jumping on things.
Well, it's a good skill to have. Do you have a favourite smell?
I mean, I love the smell of fresh bread. I like the smell of, the smell of licorice.
Oh, wow.
But yeah. And the freshly cut grass. I can never answer these things with one answer.
That's all right. The more the merrier. When you were a little girl, what did you want to be when you grew up?
A horse riding instructress.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Do you still ride?
I don't know. Aww. I think I could. I think if I got on a horse, I'd be all right. But it's feel like riding a bike, isn't it? But yeah, I've ridden for a while.
If you could be a member of a fictional family, what family would you like to be a member of?
Oh, goodness. You have good questions. Oh, that's interesting one. Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's so interesting because I kind of grew up in a very sort of kind of Walton's big type family, massively extended family, which from the outside, it looks so perfect and idealized. And I think, I'm just thinking that's not what I would want. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay, that's fine. And what, in your eyes, would be the worst job you could ever be asked to do?
Ambulance driver.
Yeah, that must be quite traumatic.
Yeah, and I don't like I don't like gory things, and I wouldn't like to have to be under that much pressure.
Yeah.
In the moment.
And I guess probably really frustrating as well when other drivers don't move out of the way.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's even not even necessarily the driver, anyone on the ambulance I would not want to be.
Especially the patient.
Yeah.
And the last thing, what is the very best piece of advice you think you've ever been given?
Interesting one. I mean, it's interesting there, because I kind of think ultimately the thing I want to say is about listening to your own voice and staying true to yourself and all of that. But I can't actually think of a specific person that said that to me. It's more something I've come to myself.
Well, that's fine. You gave yourself the advice, which is probably even better, to be honest. because that's listening to yourself, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Um, could you start off by just telling us a bit about yourself and why you do what you do? What led you to becoming an eating disorder therapist?
Sure. So I'm very much a wounded healer. I had bulimia nervosa in my late teens, early 20s. So getting on for nearly a decade, actually, for the sort of full duration of the illness. And, it's a classic thing. Back in the day, there was so little help available. Tried to pursue help. And I decided quite early on, I think about the age of 23, I thought, I really want to be able to kind of give back and help others and give people an experience perhaps that I hadn't had. So I think I kind of went into it in quite an idealistic way. I always knew, I think I wanted something that would be more vocation than like 9 to 5. I've always been very driven by my feelings. And your previous question about what I wanted to be when I grew up, I really wanted to be a horse riding instructress. And I think I could have pursued a similar path, obtaining similar values to the path I've taken, but it kind of took a different road, I guess, because of various things that happened. So yes, I was very much, came to it as a wounded healer, trained in my early 20s, just was passionate about counselling and psychology, supporting people. It really felt just like the right fit. And that was the beginning of the road, really. And then I've worked in the field now for over 20 years. So it's been a while.
Wow. And what's your favourite part of the work?
I guess empowering people with the tools for change. And I think I really enjoy supporting, encouraging, empathizing with people, seeing the best in people, getting behind them. I think I'm fairly good at forming relationships with people and helping them believe in themselves. And I find that incredibly rewarding, to be able to kind of help someone find their own power, find their own voice, start to make changes, and to be sort of gently in the background, witnessing that, I guess, and encouraging and supporting that. So that's what I find most enjoyable.
Yeah, that's so important as well, isn't it? To be able to believe in yourself is so much more empowering than having other people believe in you. Although it's lovely to have other people believing in you, to actually manage to learn and use that self-belief can take you so much further.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a therapist, you can hold hope for people and help them take those steps. But ultimately, people need to do it for themselves. And that's the empowering part.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I was wondering about is diet culture and wellness culture is so pervasive, and it's literally everywhere. You can't really go out without having some, or even in your house, having something influencing you from diet culture and societal ideals. So however good you might be at creating boundaries, it's not actually possible to escape the influence of it. And it can be really, really damaging to somebody, particularly in the early stages of recovery. So what advice would you give to somebody who is struggling with this?
I mean, I think you have to be ruthless, I think, with your boundaries. Like I always say to people, no one else is going to protect your mental health. You need to be a fierce advocate for really looking after your mental health and protecting it. And I think, as you and I both know, recovery is often quite a radical overhaul. It's not going to therapy 1 hour a week and eating a bit more.
No,
it's almost like a massive overhaul, isn't it, of your whole life?
Yeah.
And I think that means then that you have to perhaps really, in baby steps, just really start to look at your whole environment and start to really notice where the triggering points are. And then as part of your self-care, be as ruthless as you can, I guess, in starting to really set those boundaries. Because I think with the best will in the world, if we're exposing ourselves to, I mean, like you're saying, there are multiple triggers, aren't there, every day, but we do have some control of our environment. And I guess the more boundaries you can put in place, you're going to make it a bit easier for yourself, because you almost can't recover helpfully if you're being bombarded all the time, because it's almost like you're being pulled in two different directions. So I think it's having those boundaries in place, being supported as well by people that do have a sort of alternative view, who are more into body neutrality and, talking about your feelings and all the intuitive eating, all the things that we really value, having a community around you who kind of really support and encourage you as well. I think that's really, really important. And then I just think to this day, although I don't struggle with food or body image particularly anymore, there's always things that we're working on, isn't there, as part of our personal development. And I guess, if I'm wanting to work on something to this day, I will very much manipulate my environment to encourage that. So I will listen to podcasts that are educating me on that subject, or I'll be reading books, or I'll be talking to people. So I guess one can be quite proactive in creating an environment that is as optimal as possible. And of course, you can't completely protect yourself from your whole environment, but I think the more you can feel that you're in the driving seat, so you're kind of creating your own community, creating resources, having some boundaries in place, I think that can all help. And it's still going to be hard. Important to acknowledge that too.
Yes, and sometimes I think you just have to walk away and stop listening, because it is absolutely everywhere. And if a conversation you're part of takes a turn towards that sort of thing, and I mean, for me, even though I had spoken to friends and asked them not to talk about diet culture and stuff, they forget, because it's such a big part of their lives. And so sometimes I would say to them, let's not talk about this, let's talk about something different. Or sometimes I just walk away, because you do have to protect yourself, don't you?
Yeah, you really do. And I mean, I often say to my clients, just put your earplugs in, get your blinkers on, get in your recovery lane and do your own thing, and just absolutely, back yourself, even if your environment isn't massively helpful.
Yeah. Another thing society has taught us to do is to compare ourselves to others. And I found this particularly hard in my recovery, because when my hunger signals came back, I was hungry a lot and I wanted to eat more than other people around me. And this felt really, really wrong to me at the time, especially when I got comments from other people about, whoa, aren't you eating too much? And gosh, you're really hungry, don't you think that's too much? And that sort of thing. Do you think there is such a thing as too much food in recovery from a restrictive eating disorder? And how can we deal with other people's judgments over that?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm just a huge advocate for listening to your body. And actually, I know a lot of clients, and from my own experience, when you're in recovery, you almost experience ferocious hunger, isn't it? It's like this insatiable hunger. And I think people do recovery in different ways, and there's no one set way. But I know for myself in recovery, once I started eating, I couldn't almost turn that hunger off. I mean, in a way, thank goodness. So I went through weeks and probably months actually of just eating enormous amounts of food. And actually, I think it's what I needed to do to get me back to after that huge, time of deprivation. So I think it is absolute permission for people to follow their hunger. And it is going to be kind of a bit chaotic and unpredictable and hard to trust in the beginning. Even for some time. So I think I wouldn't want to say to anyone that you can't, there's a thing as too much food. I mean, I think for some people, and this wasn't true for myself, but for some people, they prefer a more sort of incremental stepped approach to recovery, where they're following a meal plan and maybe they're increasing the amount they're eating more slowly, so they feel a bit more in control of that process. So I think for some people, having that structure and stability and safety can be really, really valuable. I know for myself, I wouldn't have been able to stick to a meal plan. I was just like, once my hunger kicked in, I was hungry. So I think I just giving people, isn't it, kind of unconditional permission to eat and follow their hunger. And I think, again, like similar to what we were saying before, that you have to sort of almost again get in your own lane, and people aren't going to understand that you need to eat so much. And it's important, again, to be validated by people that get it and to protect yourself from people that don't get it. And I think, I mean, even to this day, I'm just such an advocate of regular eating. And I tend to eat more than a lot of other people probably in my life, but I'm completely at peace with that. Do you know what I mean? I always think I'm looking after myself and valuing my self-care. You know I'm not good if I go long periods without eating. So I'm absolutely going to honor my hunger and fuel myself. So, and we're all a bit different, aren't we? In terms of some people are a bit more snacky and really like the kind of regular eating and need to eat every couple of hours, which is definitely me. Other people are able to go longer. And I think there's no right way of doing it, but it's really important to get into your own lane and validate and do what's right for you.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, when I got really, really hungry, I was even waking up every sort of hour or so at night to eat. I was so hungry. I didn't have like massive amounts at once, but I just had to eat what it felt like all the time. Literally, I was just constantly eating. But it was really, really hard when other people commented on it. And I guess that if they haven't been in a restrictive eating disorder, they don't have that energy debt to make up, do they?
Yeah, I mean, I think people don't understand it, do they? And we live in a culture where all the messages are like, eat as little as possible almost, and cut out certain food groups. And so people are a bit unnerved, actually, aren't they? If they see someone kind of like really eating a large amount and like going with their hunger and appetite and all the rest of it. So yeah, and I think it is tricky dealing with other people. I mean, I think when I reflect on my own journey, I probably didn't have, that was probably something I struggled a bit less with, actually, in terms of, I'm not saying I had massively loads of supportive people around me, but I think a lot of my eating was probably done, not always in front of some of those people that would have been more triggering. Not even a deliberate act, but that's just the way it worked out. But I think it's just validating, isn't it? If you need to eat and you need to, you just want to honor your hunger, and actually, like, if you're trying to override your hunger all the time, you're just kind of prolonging the agony almost of like getting your body back to a more peaceful place.
Yeah, completely. It's you're going to have to honor that hunger at some point.
Definitely.
It's not going to go away until you eat, really. There are a lot of people, including professionals, that say that full recovery is, once you've got an eating disorder, you've got it for life, and that you can go into some form of remission, but full recovery isn't possible. What's your thoughts on that?
So, I don't know, I think, again, I'm probably getting a bit of a waffly answer on this, because it's probably not an absolute response, is there? I mean, I think from my personal experience, I'm from working with quite a lot of people as well, I do believe that a full recovery is possible, where you can genuinely reach a place where you are peaceful with food and your body, and you're managing your emotions, you're coping with life without using these old strategies. But I guess it does a bit depend on the individual, doesn't it? Like, I think, for someone, maybe if they've been suffering from an eating disorder from primary school age, not to say that someone can't fully recover, because I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on some of this as well, because I know you suffered from really quite young.
Yeah.
But I guess, if you have had an eating disorder for a longer time, potentially perhaps it is a bit more challenging, because if you've become more entrenched in the habit, the identity, you've missed out more on life. So there could be more fears about change, which might make recovery seem harder. But I do believe, actually, that thinking it through more and more, I think anyone can recover. But I think there's a real difference as well. Eating disorder recovery is not just about changing behaviours and weight restoring, if you need to weight restore, because, of course, a lot of people aren't underweight when they have an eating disorder. Mm-hmm. But I think the important parts for a full recovery are about really being able to sort of like, process perhaps trauma from the past, find healthier strategies in terms of dealing with your emotions, really sort of practice that kind of self-love, improving your self-esteem, finding your voice. And I think if you're addressing all of those factors, then I believe that you can really get to a place of being much more free, not just with food and body image, but in your relationships, in your life, with your purpose, that whole bigger picture. And I think sometimes where people get stuck is, maybe they've had a lot of, perhaps they didn't get the right help, whatever the right help is, but the right help for that person early on. Maybe it was very symptom focused. Maybe it just wasn't a validating help that they received. And then they've perhaps tried to focus on changing behaviors. They haven't really had perhaps the opportunity to do the deeper work. So they've just perhaps changed behaviors, but still had all the thoughts, and then I think you can get stuck, and then it can feel like, recovery is not possible for me. Actually, I feel worse when I try and recover, but they probably haven't had a full insight into what is possible with recovery in terms of a full flourishing recovery.
Yeah, I agree. I guess it depends. For me, I needed to find out what the eating disorder was doing to serve me in the first place. And that actually changed throughout my life in different ways. And it was a coping mechanism for lots of different life events for me to cope with. And so, learning to unpick those, and actually, because I started so young, I never learned how to process my own emotions at all. And I used the eating disorder to just bury them. And so, I had to learn how to feel an emotion and to process it and to go through that, which I was so scared of doing. It was absolutely, the thought of doing it was terrifying. But it turned out that the thought of doing it was far, far, far worse than actually doing it. And once I'd learned how to process the emotions and just to allow myself to cry and allow myself to be angry and just to feel the things, was so much easier than the fear of doing it. But I believe full recovery is totally possible. But I do think it's much easier with help.
Yeah, no, I think it's challenging to do on your own, isn't it? I mean, nothing's impossible, but particularly as well if you're in an environment that might be exacerbating a lot of your symptoms and all of that.
Yeah. With regards to that, because everybody is different, so you've got lots of experience in the field in lots of different parts. What different ways are there of getting support?
I guess, I'm going to say this because I'm a therapist, the most obvious thing is therapy. Therapy, or, I think coaching, as you do, is becoming more and more of an option now as well, which is really, really helpful. But I guess there's various within that coaching therapy space. There's lots of different ways of working, aren't there? It can be like focusing more on the past and understanding and exploring that, working on motivation and working more on symptoms for things like perhaps compassion focused therapy, cognitive behavior therapy. Could be a bit of both, maybe with cognitive analytic therapy or something. It can be dialectical behavior therapy. I guess many, many different therapies can be really, really helpful. I think as well, just talking to people and actually, being open with your loved ones, people that you can be open and honest with and who can listen and be supportive. That in itself, I think as well, is a really, really helpful route. I think quite a lot of people now as well are recovering more through kind of somatic means. So maybe through kind of music or dance, or really getting back into their bodies, because they don't find the kind of talking therapy so beneficial for them. And then I guess there's all the kind of like stuff that's online now as well, isn't there? And kind of podcasts and YouTube and reading and blogs and articles and that kind of route. I mean, I guess it's kind of endless really, isn't it? Because I think for each individual, I've got one client I worked with years ago, and when I saw her probably about 20 years ago, she was really sort of struggling a lot with bulimia, had really traumatic past, and she contacted me probably about 10 years on from when we were working together, and she was in Australia, and she said, I've got really into yoga, and that's been the thing that's really helped me. And
Oh, wow.
that was wonderful to hear. So I guess there's lots of different routes, aren't there?
Yeah. No, that the yoga and dance and stuff completely makes sense, because often we're trapped in our heads, aren't we, within an eating disorder, and you kind of disassociate from your body almost, because you block all the signals coming from your body.
Yeah, they're really true. And I think that's particularly as well, I don't want to generalize too much, but I think particularly perhaps more with restrictive eating disorders, like with that, I always think with anorexia nervosa, you and I'd be interested what you think about this actually, but it almost feels that you're a bit more kind of frozen and disconnected from your emotions. So when you can like do that somatic work of getting back into your body, sometimes that can be the thing that does help you to unblock, because it's sometimes just so hard to access the thoughts and the feelings in a kind of verbal way, isn't it?
Yes.
It's very much held in the body. Whereas it's very interesting, because my experience, I had a very brief phase of anorexia, but I was much more in bulimia. And for me, actually, I've never had a problem expressing my emotions. In a way, I'm quite high EE, but I was very dysregulated. I could express my emotions in a way I kind of, in a way, in quite sort of dysfunctional ways often. But I guess the thing I didn't have was the self-trust and finding my voice. But actually, for myself personally, that talking therapy has been really, really helpful. But yeah, anyway, I don't know. I think the somatic work can be beneficial for everyone, really. But I think perhaps particularly sometimes if you're very disconnected from your emotions, and I guess whatever your diagnosis.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'd love to know a bit more about group therapy, because I hear good things and more challenging things, particularly with things like anorexia, where there can be a competitive aspect to it. You've got experience with taking group therapy, haven't you?
Yeah, so I mainly do bulimia nervosa and binge eating disorder groups. That's what my main experience has been in. But I have done as well a bit of mantra, which is the Maudsley model now for treating anorexia nervosa. So I guess group therapy is more and more common now, particularly if you're going down the NHS route, because of long waiting lists and making therapy a bit more accessible to people. But yeah, I mean, I think definitely pros and cons. So I think the pros are the bonding and the reduction in shame and the sense of community is really amazing in a group. I think almost every group I've run, all the people have stayed in contact afterwards. They've got so much value and support from one another to be able to say things out loud that they've never been able to talk about before. And I think that is just so, so valuable. And I think before people come into the group, they're often just so apprehensive and just really worried about how they're going to deal with all of that. But they find that aspect of it really helpful. I think it's not so...
helps. Sorry, I was going to say, I guess it helps that they really see that they're not alone.
Definitely, because I mean, eating disorders are so isolating, aren't they?
Yes.
So to realize, someone else actually gets it. I can say these things out loud and people don't think I'm just really strange because of they're doing very similar things.
Yes.
So I think that's really helpful. I think the drawback is, one, the competitiveness. I think again, probably particularly more with perhaps restrictive eating disorders. I think, that look at people like comparing each other's bodies. It's probably happened a bit less since we've been doing groups more online, because you just can't see each other in the same way. But I think, again, if you can kind of create safety where people can even start to talk about that and start to look at the root of the competitiveness and understand that and kind of normalize it, and helps people to support people to start challenging maybe that comparing mindset and realizing, in a way, I guess it's a symptom, isn't it, of just not feeling good enough.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
and I guess the drawback, you're taking an opportunity to actually tackle that.
Yeah, so definitely. And it's human beings, everyone experiences envy of others sometimes, or or jealousy, or feeling inferior, feeling superior. And I think it's just great to just talk about all of this, because there's a lot of shame and sort of secrecy, isn't there, around some of those emotions.
Yeah. I I mean, I used to compare myself to people all the time, like how much they ate. If anyone else was going on a diet, I had to lose more weight, even though I didn't really have anything to lose. Yeah, I felt hugely competitive. If my husband stopped eating his dinner because he'd had enough, I had to leave more than he did. And yeah, it's so competitive, and but always, I suppose, so that I came off worst. I didn't want to win, I guess. I wanted to come last, which is very strange. But yeah, like reverse competition, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I think it's very interesting, isn't it? Because I think on the one hand, it's very self-punishing, but then I think on the other hand, in that moment, there's a fleeting euphoria from feeling I've had more discipline, maybe.
Yes, yeah, it's kind of like, especially in the early stages, it felt like a superpower. Felt like I was able to survive when on nothing, when other people had to eat and stuff like that. It kind of almost feel superior in a kind of twisted way.
Yeah. I think it's so helpful just to say this out loud, isn't it? Because I think, in the culture we live in, the culture doesn't help, does it? Diet culture does kind of put on a pedestal in a way. If you are very disciplined around food, you are seen a bit as kind of morally superior and having like really kind of good values and all of that. So it's massively reinforced, isn't it, by the environment that we live in?
Yes, and really validated by like friends and family and stuff who sort of praise you for being ill, which is, I suppose they don't realize, do they? They don't realize what they're actually praising you for. Again, that's all part of diet culture. Making us praise weight loss and abstinence and control, and yeah,
no, it's very toxic, isn't it? But I think it's so normalized, isn't it? Like, I think, if you go out and ask someone on the street, oh, what do you think about eating disorders being on the rise, etc., people be like, oh, it's just so terrible, and have this stereotype image in their head of what someone looks like with an eating disorder. But then they're probably going home and listening to like one of the top podcasts of the day, having some expert from California talking about intermittent fasting and how disciplined you have to be, and but like having arguably quite disordered eating patterns and a very high level of kind of restraint, which for a lot of people just would not be sustainable without leading to a full-blown eating disorder. So it's really tricky, isn't it? Because I think as a culture, we don't really join the dots. We think of like eating disorders as this distinct group of dysfunctional people over here, whereas we're kind of all on that spectrum somewhere.
It's a
with
very fine line. It's a really fine line. I see so many people that, particularly at my gym actually, that have definitely got some quite badly disordered eating and views of themselves and views of why they exercise and how they should exercise and stuff. And yet they think it's totally normal. And then you've got people going, oh, summer's coming, got to get the summer bodies ready and stuff. But a body is a body every day of the year, and it doesn't need to change or be anything different for summer. And yeah, there's so much pressure to be a certain way, look a certain way, behave a certain way, as though we're all robots that have to fit this one standard, when one of the most beautiful things about the human race is that we're all so very different.
Yeah, no, it's very true.
And it's do you think that people can really control their weight sustainably long term without being in an eating disorder?
Oh, it's so complex, isn't it? Because I think, again, like what you're saying, like all our bodies are very, very different, aren't they? So I think, again, if you're someone who is naturally bigger boned, or you're taller, or you're just naturally more muscular, you're not going to fully fit into what is seen as a healthy BMI, are you? Body mass index. So Yeah, I think it's so important, isn't it, to look at each individual and where is their kind of peaceful place, and to look at things like health at every size, and have a broader definition of health, because of health isn't all about how much you weigh, is it? Health is about so much more than that, and also about mental health as well.
And emotional health, spiritual health, sleep, connection. It all comes into health, doesn't it?
It really does. And I always say to my clients, and that centenarians, people that live to 100, and they're not spiralizing their courgettes and walking so many steps a day, are they? It's all about purpose and connection, and having meaning in your life, and having people around you that really love you.
Yes.
And maybe eating a moderate kind of, I don't want to say the word diet really, but I'm saying diet not in terms of restricting, but just in talking about what you eat.
Yes.
But in enjoying food as well. So it's so much more nuanced.
Yeah, I was actually watching a program last night that was saying about the French, who seem to still live longer and have healthier lifestyles, even though they drink a lot. Smoking is more common in France than anywhere else, and they eat loads and loads, particularly breads and cheeses and stuff like that. But the difference is that they were saying on this program last night that they have these 2-3 hour meals in the evening where they're all just socializing, and they're not talking about work, they're not talking about the stresses and stuff. They're just having fun and just relaxed and natural, and all the work stress and the comparing with each other stress and all the should this, should that is gone, and they're just relaxed and enjoying. And it's that lack of stress which is being attributed to their longer lives, not their lifestyle at all.
Yeah, and it's so true, isn't it? I mean, I think that sounds like fascinating and makes so much sense, because I think if you're trying to control your diet and exercise, you're going to have such high level anxiety, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're going to be super stressed, massively in fight, flight or striving mode. You're not going to feel very peaceful.
No, and the stress hormones themselves do far more damage than anything you're going to put in your mouth.
Yeah. It's so true, isn't it? We just lost perspective, haven't we, really?
Yeah.
It's a bit bonkers.
Yeah, as a society, we've definitely lost our way, for sure. It's all these societal ideals are just not helpful or healthy to just enjoying living a life. So now we've put the world to rights. Have you got anything else you would like to say to the listeners about what you do and how they can work with you?
Sure. So, I mean, if you want to find out more about the work I do, I mean, I do one-to-one therapy with people. I have got a bit of a waiting list. I do want to just say that so I don't kind of raise expectations. I've started a Patreon, a bite-size eating disorder therapy. So for £5 a month, you can get additional podcast episodes, videos, additional kind of content, and you can request questions that you want answered. So that's a way that you can access support at really, really affordable rate. I've also, of course, got my eating disorder therapist podcast. So that has 2 episodes a week. Oh, thank you, Julia. I feel I'm completely winging it, to be honest with you.
Don't we all?
And then, of course, it'd be worth mentioning the transformational event that we are holding in September. So it's now online. It's Saturday, the 30th of September. And this is inspiring prevention of eating disorders and body image issues, and got together 13 different professionals from the field. Really just to explore some of these topics that actually we've been talking on the podcast today about, and just really getting together people that are passionate about making these changes in society, because I think ultimately it's about teaching individuals about the psychology around food, around body image, around mental health, and really changing our view as a culture. That's where the work needs to be done. By the time people get into services, it's often too late. Well, it's not too late, because you can always heal, but it's so much better, isn't it, to get those roots down early on, actually. So so if you're interested in that, I'll send you the links, and just stick the links in the bio. But yeah, would love you to join, I guess, if you're listening and you are passionate about these issues.
Yeah, I'm going, definitely. Got my ticket. Amazing. So thank you everyone for listening. And if you would like to rate this podcast 5 stars, we can reach more people. And thank you, Harriet, so much for being a guest. It's been wonderful having you.
Thanks so much, Julia.